So the next story is, of course, UK Transphobia peddling far-right agenda warns anti-racism watchdog. So on the 3rd of June, the UK-based Institute of Race Relations published an article titled Feminism, Biological Fundamentalism and the Attack on Trans Rights, written by Sophia Siddiqui, Deputy Editor for Race and Class, a quarterly journal on racism, empire, and globalization from the UK Institute of Race Relations. And I've seen this being shared around by a lot of papers, that tackle LGBT plus issues, and they've been putting front and center, racism watchdog, links gender critical movement to racism. There's been quite a bit on that, and so I decided to track down the original article, which is linked in the agenda. I'm really sorry if I'm just slowing down here. So it's linked in the agenda, so you can go read it for yourself. And the article does do a good job of discussing the breadth of anti-trans rhetoric across Europe. It links back to what's going on in Poland and more recently with Hungary, etc., and how said changes are being pushed by fascism. It also compares gender critical to race realism and the whole essentialist ideals that are present in both ideologies and how they're based on deeply flawed understandings of human biology, which just don't stand up to scrutiny, but they are presented as being scientific positions. They also call out the UK's government's unwillingness to act on anti-trans hate. So there is a lot of good to be found in the article. As many of you know, I did a video titled When a Feminist Isn't. I think it was the far right and astroturfing, if I remember correctly. Actually, I've got the video link here that I can always have a look at. 1 second. It is When a Feminist Isn't, Christian Astroturfing and the Trans Panic, in which I go and I link, various connections between people like Posey Parker, and, various alt-righters, various fascists and Nazis and stuff. I also talk about where the funds are coming from the US and how that money is coming from places like the Heritage Foundation, which is, again, a far-right institution which is against women's rights, queer rights, just everything. It's just your generic far-right hate organization. That's coming across to the UK. That money is funding the movement over here. So I go into all these sorts of details, and it's good that other places are starting to acknowledge it. However, a big criticism I have of the article, which I haven't seen mentioned elsewhere, is the way in which they discuss the whole notion of gender-critical feminists. Take this, for example. Quote, "What should be of concern to those advocating for a strong civil rights framework that protects all minorities from discrimination is how gender-critical feminists play into the hands of far-right street voices and extreme right electoral parties which would like to abolish anti-discrimination protections altogether." End quote. And, quote, "It is cause for concern that some of the most vocal attacks on trans rights come from within the queer and feminist community, particularly at a time when LGBT and reproductive rights are being eroded across Europe. Nobody from a minority group should be campaigning for the erosion of other people's rights in an attempt to border the other. The denial of solidarity between trans women and feminists, creating a false dichotomy between the two, detracts from the issues that affect us all, such as rollbacks on reproductive rights, the epidemic of gender-based violence, attacks on LGBT rights, and the entrenchment of nativist politics across Europe." End quote. And what really got to me about this is the fact that the article seems to be treating so-called gender-critical feminists as if they are naive participants who have been misled by the right. That they're genuinely well-meaning feminists. They just have the wrong ideas. And as we have shown throughout our work here on the channel, That is just not the case. As mentioned earlier, a lot of their funding comes from out and out far-right organizations in America, like the Alliance for Freedom and the Heritage Foundation. Like, they know this, okay? And they are associating with far-right groups in Europe as well, openly. You know, so to pretend like transphobes under the label of gender critical feminists are just being misled. It does, I'm trying to find the word here, like, it's making out the people who are a danger to the trans community to be less dangerous than they actually are, because the truth is, many of them know that they are working alongside fascists, and that's why they're doing it. They don't adopt the label feminist because they're actually feminists. They adopt the label feminist because it's a great way to confuse matters. You got something to say? Sorry.
I was just going to say they're repackaging violence as ignorance.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, and I do wish, I don't know if the writer is trans. I didn't want to do the whole, oh, let's check every social media profile, find out sort of thing. I don't know if they're trans. I don't know if they're not trans. Either way, they don't seem to have a very good understanding of the gender critical movement in the UK. You know, people have been pointing out it's not just racism, it's also the anti-Semitism. The whole notion of George Soros, you know, funding all surgeries for trans teenagers. You know, the background Jewish billionaire funding everything. There was the whole thing of the vigil recently for Sarah Everhard. For those who don't remember, Sarah Everard was a cis woman who was kidnapped and murdered by a member of British police. And during a memorial for her, another woman, Patsy Stevenson, was arrested as police decided to resort to violence. And in response to that, because Patsy Stevenson supported trans people, people in the gender critical spaces started calling her a crisis actor. That was it. Calling the whole thing a false flag, designed to get sympathy for, you know, trans people, etc. So, like, there's a lot of anti-Semitism going on there, and there is a lot of racism. There's also a lot of appropriation of, like, trauma. Rather famously, I forget her name, we covered her once. There was, she actually made the George Soros allegation as well. We used her photo as the thumbnail, but I forget her name. But she compared being trans to being a blackface actor in a minstrel show. So, you know, a white person coming along talking about how trans people living their lives is akin to, you know, racist stereotypes, etc. So, you know, this is not a bug. This is not an accident. This is a core feature. Okay? And you go back to the original Nazi Party. The way in which they got the working class in Germany to side with them was to call themselves nationalist socialist. Even, like, there's nothing socialist about them. So, you know, fascism adopting terminology to cover their true intentions is absolutely nothing new. We need to stop treating bigots who are deciding to continue to inflict violence upon marginalized people like they're just, you know, misinformed, you know, poor people have been misled. Because when it comes to the gender critical crowd, let's be honest, who is leading them? The vast majority are wealthy white women. That's largely who is leading it. But sadly, society has been set up in a way that wealthy white women always get the benefit of the doubt. You know, and it's just kind of it's fucking annoying to see an article that gets so much good. You know, mess up in such a fundamental way. You don't accidentally side with fascism. Like that itself is an inherently ridiculous notion. You do not accidentally side with fascism. You know, the "Are we the baddies" sketch isn't an actual thing. Okay. Like, I just woke up one day and I was wearing a Nazi uniform. It's like, that doesn't happen. Okay. These people have had their values checked every single step of the way and have decided, you know what, no, I'm absolutely fine with fascism, okay? So yes, I just wanted to bring that up and mention that, as well as give a criticism. Again, there is still a lot of good to be read in the article. Do go read it, you know. It's good to have perspectives from other people, especially non-white people. So definitely do go read it. Again, different perspective on things. But there is that one criticism I do have, and I just wanted to make that clear.
I actually do have.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, one small thing to add is, you know, I don't think we're saying that this person is malicious. And,
oh no.
Yeah, I can understand why they do this, because more broadly, there's an issue, I think, of us as, not necessarily as a society, because there are a lot of people who will like very selectively do, but like people who are acting in good faith have a tendency to assume that everyone else is as well. There's that famous saying of famous slightly ableist saying of "don't attribute to malice which can be adequately explained by stupidity." And like this has come up with us as well, with the Lily Orchard video we put out a few months ago. One of the things I wrote in the notes was like, hey, I noticed that you're focusing on like whether or not she knew what she was doing was wrong. We can't do that. Like we cannot entertain that question. And I think that's something that we really need to work on, is making sure that we don't entertain questions about whether or not people know that what they're doing is wrong. Because in certain cases, yes, they do. And like if they really do manage to not know what they're doing wrong in a case like this, that's the sort of situation where you have to step in and stop them anyway. You can't afford to handle people like that with kid gloves. Like they know what they're doing is wrong, but if they somehow did this by mistake, that doesn't make things better. That makes it worse.
Like, there's a degree of harm involved that you can't fuck around with. You can't just downplay it. You can't trivialize the matter. Like, if it turns out, oh shit, I really didn't know, I'm going to fix everything, I'm going to like go everything out of the way to undo the damage I did, that will become very apparent very quickly. But that's not how most of these people going to react. You know, we see that time and time again. These people double down because it is reflective of who they are. So yes.
I guess one other thing I wanted to mention is you talked about how these people are getting their money from far-right groups and like the leaders are wealthy white cis women. But like for the people who are at the lower levels, like the people on Twitter who are harassing people constantly and swarming any post that like acknowledges trans people exist or whatever, you might say, oh, maybe they don't know. But like, you don't genuinely believe that you're a feminist while also saying that women are biologically inferior to men and defining women by their capacity to produce children and you know, being against bodily autonomy. Like everything they believe is so at odds with the most basic feminist principles. You can't do that by accident.
Yeah. The transphobes,
unless you've never heard of what a feminist is, you just can't.
The transphobes destroyed the Gillick competence standard in the UK, like, and that was the standard created around birth control, you know. So yeah, it really is a situation of just like try to be more aware of the situation on the ground.
Also, like the whole every single time one of these people starts speaking, they're always like women and girls this, women and girls that. No, like no one has ever put such an emphasis on identifying as a woman or a girl before the transphobia became a huge issue. It's an occasional thing that and I'm speaking again. I'm speaking as someone who spent the first 15 years of my life living as a girl. I never saw this anywhere. I never saw women or girls talking about themselves this way. The reason they do it is to define a group from which trans people can be an other that is attacking that group. It's not because they actually feel that way or feel that it's important. The few cases you would see that kind of language is in things like reproductive care that's assumed to only be for women, which, like, I feel like most people found that sort of language almost like annoying and demeaning. It's kind of like the whole because it comes with that whole hyper feminine branding that's just honestly like insulting. It's like no one identifies this way. If people are identifying this way in good faith, you will know, because there will be a good reason for it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how many people go out there going out of their way to identify as men and boys who aren't really toxic and gross?
Yeah.